The events of this story take place at a time when the world was undergoing a very dramatic change. It wasn't something normal, like a shifting of tectonic plates, or a volcanic eruption. It was much more interesting. Monsters began to appear in this world. And very soon, they could be found absolutely everywhere. All this pushed the planet to the brink of extinction, because there were too many monsters. The entity that accompanied their emergence was a tower. It stood on a mysterious earth that gave these monsters power and authority. People began to call it the Tower of the Devil, or the Tower of God. This name was given for a reason. If you enter this tower and wish for something, you will definitely get what you want inside. It does not matter at all what you want, power, honor, or wealth. Just go up to the tower and all your desires will be satisfied. This huge tower had 999 floors. The beings who ran it were demons and gods. Governments around the world worked very hard to stop people from going to this tower. However, nothing could prevent people from defying the tower. All those who were against it were immediately destroyed. The demons willed that all who would prevent others from defying the tower would be destroyed. It's been 5 years since billions of people began to pay attention to this tower. The main character, named Michael, decided to try to start the first attempt of humanity to clear the 600th floor. There were a lot of monsters, explosions everywhere. During the sweep, there is a big conflict between the people. The guys immediately realized that something was wrong with Michael. He received too much magical energy from the tower. Now you have to be very careful with him. His actions are unpredictable. Colleagues tried to stop the guy, but it was almost impossible. He was sure that his actions were correct, and other people's opinions did not bother him. He had a goal and did not see obstacles, because he was a master of weapons and superhuman. It was he who managed to surpass the 9-star, and take the title of the strongest in this county. He was able to get the skeletons out of the ground, revive them and make them serve for himself, make them his army. Michael was the greatest necromancer. He was fed up with this world and humanity. All he needed now was to be strong. His plan was to take advantage of his colleagues, to become the most powerful because of them. The boys had already realized for sure that Michael had betrayed humanity by siding with the devil. After all, he had unleashed his army of skeletons and monsters on them. The boys had no choice but to defeat the traitor Michael. So they immediately went into battle with the skeletons. These people were quite strong. It was not difficult to cope with him. As one might assume, Mike did not manage to defeat all 9 stellar. This fight lasted less than 5 minutes. When the skillet ran out, the guys all attacked the traitor together. In the name of humanity, they struck him hardest. Michael was the one who betrayed humanity for power. But that was just the story the whole world knew about. In fact, Michael did not pass on humanity. In fact, he was betrayed by the very 9 stars, 8 to be exact, a fact that was very well hidden from the world. But 10 years later, something very interesting happened. It was the most ordinary day, in an ordinary apartment, with flies flying on dirty dishes, and a young guy sleeping in the room. Then he comes up abruptly, and you start yelling about 9 stars then. As it turned out, it was Michael. His secret ability worked successfully. The spell he used allows you to send his soul into a body that suits him. Apparently the guy was now in Korea. Even though he was successfully reborn, his anger at the Star 9 was still there. If they hadn't interfered, he would have been fine on his own. Before he passed away, Michael was very eager to know why he was betrayed. At first, everyone laughed at him. The guy's behavior was very strange. Michael just wanted to save them, and in return for his kindness, he received a knife in the back. A little later, he did get an answer, and was asked not to take it personally, as it turned out that it was an old friend of Michael's named Michelle who was involved. Michelle was a combat star among the 9 star, but this time he decided not to participate in the 600th floor sweep. After a while, the guy's eyes began to blur. He lost too much red liquid. That time Michael realized his mistake, and accepted his defeat, but promised to return. 9 stars should not relax, because it was not over yet. At that point, the guy still managed to unobtrusively apply his ability. The number 1 task was to come back much stronger than he was then, and definitely avenge that betrayal. After that, Michael woke up in Korea, in a completely different body. Michael didn't even want the 9 stars to serve for him in the future. The plan was simple: grind their souls so they could never come back to life again. Then the alarm went off, which made the guy find his phone. When he saw the smartphone, he was pleasantly surprised, because it had been a long time since he had used one of these things. The phones were very different from what they used to be, but Michael didn't pay much attention to it. Then he turned it on, and the date he saw there shocked him. When Michael woke up, it seemed like only a few moments had passed. He needed to find out as soon as possible if the guy could even use magic with this body. I was also very annoyed by a fly that flew around the room nonstop. It was necessary to immobilize it as soon as possible. One lucky flap and the problem was solved. Holding the fly in his arms, the guy tried to use his power, and said out loud the word that should activate the magic, but only his phone responded, and he tried to find some information on the internet about the word. Then he tried again to awaken his magic, but all to no avail. As it turned out, there was not a single unit of mana in this body, which is necessary to use magic. In order to replenish mana, it was necessary to climb this tower, but so far it was unclear how to do it without a single skill. Since it had already been 10 years, it was necessary to check what floor the people had broken through to. On the news, the guy saw that the bastards who betrayed him would only go up 200 stories. That was a big plus. As long as they took their time going up, Michael could catch up with them and get his revenge. It was decided to go straight to the tower, because it made no sense to practice just outside. Even though the guy's physical and magical level is very small, it will be much easier for him to start from scratch, because he has very strong knowledge that will help him get in shape quickly. After that, he will definitely come and do the sweetest revenge. After a while, the guy was already at the entrance of the tower. There were quite a few people who were obsessed with the idea of sweeping the floor and becoming very rich. Unfortunately, not everyone understood how dangerous it could be. This place is very strong and energetic. There are a lot of stories and hopes. Finally, Michael was able to return. It was necessary to make sure that once again everyone around knew who Michael was. The entrance to the tower was opened. Now you have to be very careful and slowly go in. Despite these demands, all around ran. One Michael went with a slow, confident gait. It was the beginning of the road to sweet revenge. When everyone walked in, the door slammed shut. After all this time, things have changed a lot inside. A very clever learning arena has emerged. And that's a good thing, because there's nowhere else around where you can get similar skills. Michael has to go through a path that is filled with different frogs. It's true, according to reviews, of all the 10 training floors, this one is the most ridiculous. Then the guy was explained the rules of how to pass this trail, and was also told that in case of a positive result, he would be well rewarded. But he wasn't interested in money at all. Before he started the race, Michael decided to check his body stats. The stats were just awful, not even close to what they had been before. But there was no time to get upset, so we had to work with what we had. Without thinking too much, the guy did a little warm-up and started his run. He was sure he was going to do great. As soon as Michael left the starting point, a magical arrow flew out to meet him, from which he successfully returned. The peculiarity of these arrows was that they are visible only at the moment of firing, then you can only guess where it will fly. Why more arrows flew? There were really a lot of them, a real challenge for the first floor. It was going fine, but pretty soon the first 2 arrows hit Michael. In spite of this, the boy did not stop and continued to run as hard as he could. After that, another big arrow shot followed, which caused the guy to get a lot of wounds. Even though he was in a lot of pain, he was forced to keep going. Eventually the guy just crawled to the finish line and collapsed. As the level was passed, the tower healed him, and the guy was greatly relieved. Now the boy wondered how long he could keep up this pace. It became clear that just running mindlessly was no longer an option. Some kind of plan was needed, otherwise he might not make it to the next level. The guy had only 2 traits that made him the strongest in the world. One of them was insatiability. it helped him not to give up and go all the way, because the guy had an eternal feeling of lack of anything. The red liquid that the boy spilled after each fight gave him more and more experience, which will allow him to take over the entire world. He was rewarded for passing the level, and received 1 unit of amplification of all his parameters. The main thing is to keep going, and then everything will work out for sure. Despite the fact that Michael got a lot of bodies, he kept going like a tank and did not give up. Each time Michael's skill level improved more and more. A month later, Michael all managed to pass one of the training floors. After the guy entered the portal, he was fully healed again. Who would have thought it would all take so long? There were a couple of demons and gods who liked Michael's method of passing obstacles. As it turned out, the men of the Star Nine were watching the newcomers, looking for their own kind. This made the boy very angry, because most likely the creation of such a difficult training period was their doing. None of the observers revealed their names, or even their pseudonyms. They are probably arguing right now about who will take Michael as an apprentice. Then notices began to appear saying that the gods don't like the boy's disobedience, but the demons, on the contrary, like his vocabulary. Then a notice popped up showing the demon's alias after all. Michael recognized him immediately in his former life. The monster couldn't get away from him, and he really wanted to teach Michael. But he didn't reciprocate. But he's actually not the worst demon. It's thanks to him that Michael was able to make soul transplantation into another body a reality. Each time more and more gods and demons began to test Michael's interest. At one point the guy was getting tired of it. There were too many notifications. Michael asked everyone to shut up, because they were annoying as hell. It was impossible to choose everyone, so Michael urged him to watch in silence. Even if someone were to be taken as a coach, it certainly wouldn't be the demon who wouldn't get off Michael's back in his last life. After such a long dialogue, the boy decided to look at the rewards that could be obtained in the training phase. What he saw looked very tempting. It had everything he needed to defeat his friends. Especially nice was the fact that it would be possible to get a good amount of mana, which is now a big problem. Since Michael was a hero whose magic is all about mana, he would be allowed to increase its resource. Then a notice appeared saying that thanks to his intense progress, the guy had unlocked some more ability. I had to figure out what it was all about. As it turned out, Michael now had access to the traits that the body's previous owner had possessed. Then the guy discovered another talent called versatility. Thanks to this talent, he could be good at absolutely everything. It was unbelievable. With all those privileges, it should work out for sure. The title that is called the best in everything, Michael did not get in his last life, but now the chance to do it is much greater. The boy began to receive offers to become an apprentice again, but he graciously declined and asked that they stop. Then he said he was going up to the next floor and let the demons watch him quietly, if they wanted to. The next room is supposed to be the selection and training room. Inside, the guy is greeted by a lot of weapons, of completely different classes. One of them had to be chosen, for further training. Once the man has made his choice, he needs to destroy the floor beneath him, in order to move again to the first floor of the tower. Since the guy is a mage, he did not think long and chose a bow. It is just a perfect weapon to combine with magic. When the guy was ready, he asked for a practice target to be created for him. Targets were created and Mike immediately began aiming at them. As the steely flew, the guy picked up a melee weapon and ran to finish off the enemy. After handling the first one, the guy took out 2 small blades and threw them exactly at the heads of the next 2 targets, thus neutralizing them. The test did not end there. After the ground targets, the air targets arrived immediately and fired directly at the guy. This time the guy managed to avoid an accurate hit, so he ran urgently toward the guns. It was necessary to decide something as soon as possible, because the second salvo should be soon. In spite of this, Mike felt like a fish in water, and was ready to cope with any difficulties. In order to cope with the flying hole, he took in his hands a secret weapon, on which he put his magic. Now when the drones launched their attack, they would have absolutely no chance of survival. for now the staff Michael picked up could repel all enemy attacks and send them flying backwards. It was just amazing the guy, for the first time in his life, was able to use his all-conquering trait. It looked as if Michael had been using this weapon for years, but in fact it was the first time in his life. Now in order to leave this room, the guy had to choose a class. In fact, this may be a waste of time, so the question arises whether it is possible to do this with the help of achievement points. Unlocking a class slot would be a lot faster and smarter with coins. It remains to be seen if it is realistic at all. Achievement points are a currency within the tower that can be earned for destroying monsters, clearing floors, raising levels, and so on. The use of these coins allows users to make no more changes to the system. In order to unlock the class slot, it was necessary to pay 5,050 coins, and the balance was 5,000. Only 50 coins were missing. It was necessary to think where to get 50 coins quickly. Since the situation was desperate, the guy decided to appoint himself a coach. This would allow him to talk to him, and for the first conversation with God, he could pass the achievement and get the missing coins to buy. Only now there was one problem, and that was the coach who could talk at any minute and distract the guy from his main goals and objectives. This began to be annoying from the very beginning. Then the guy immediately made the purchase of the class, and the task was fully accomplished. The training phase has been completely passed. Now, after destroying the training selection room, Mike will be transferred to the real first floor of the tower, where he can begin his journey of revenge already for real. On the first floor, the guy immediately met the first monsters and people who could not overpower them. When the guy managed to put the monster down with one punch, all the other people were just shocked by his power. Initially, people thought it was done with magic, but it was clearly seen as a normal physical blow by Michael. After what they saw, they already wanted to join forces together and move forward together. The guy wasn't initially very cooperative, so he told the guys to get lost and also let them know that if they touched any of these monsters, their lives would be over. The guys were scared out of their minds and decided to go right away and get lost, without a second warning. But the monsters who stayed behind weren't going anywhere. That was their biggest mistake. Even Michael was surprised. He didn't think these weak little monsters would want to avenge their friend. But it was their choice, so they had to take the fight. With angry red eyes, the boys ran into battle. After one easy swing of the small, one of them could do nothing anymore, and the other saw this and decided to try to run away. But Michael would not forgive the one who attacked him a second time, so he shot the running monster. The guy had already dealt with 3 monsters and was standing to collect his prey, and he was only now officially congratulated on his transition to the first floor. Apparently, the system did not even suggest that this was possible. When he opened the list of tasks, he saw that he had to defeat 7 more monsters like them to get to the second floor. It was too easy to do. You could go to the second floor right now, so it was decided in advance to perform the achievement called the Fighter. What to do it? You need to destroy 1,000 monsters of the same species. To do it on the first floor will be much easier than on any other. But before this guy needs to fill his empty vest, but he will not do it the usual way for all. The guy will feed on the soul of the kobold he just destroyed. After the soul enters Michael's stomach, he will be able to see his memories, gain his power, and learn to understand and communicate in his language in a couple of seconds. Over the course of the day, the guy's stats went up noticeably. With a level like his, people are already on the 10th floor. It's hard to believe that all this time it was possible to reach this level without even going up to the second floor. As it turned out, when the guy bought a class and associated it with the skill master of everything, he began to receive bonuses for absolutely all the classes that are in the game. This is what raised so much of his stats. After looking at the stats, the guy had a flashback to his past life. He remembered where the Kobold King's lair was, and how much he had mocked him and his crew when they had been captured by him. The Lord summons whole waves of monsters that go roaming all over the forest and scare people who have just entered the first floor. But to defeat the whole wave of monsters alone will not be easy. For this you need at least not a large army. So Michael awakens the sleeping kobolds, makes skeletons out of them, and makes them serve for himself. Right now, an army began to assemble for the march to the Lord. Thanks to the fact that Michael created himself warriors, he managed to change his class to his native one called Necromancer. Since the guy is a jack of all trades and had many useful memories, changing classes was very easy for him. But it wasn't enough for his complete satisfaction. All the most interesting things would be waiting ahead. In the meantime, 4 more kobolds had arrived in the clearing, probably to avenge their friends, but they didn't realize they had no chance yet. Michael was pleased. Their arrival meant adding to his army. So he immediately ordered his skeletons to attack the kobolds and make them members of the team. In the meantime, the guy already had 10 defeated monsters on his account. A new task became available to him, to destroy 15 more of them. In general, the guy's memory did not fail. He found the abandoned house he was looking for. When Michael went inside, he was very pleased that no one had found the place before him. He told his army to stay outside, and he went inside, kicked the wooden floor hard, and the dungeon was opened. Necromancer is a highly ranked class that uses souls for almost all of its purposes. And the very first Spirit Lord hides in this very dungeon, in a coffin that can change classes. As he pushed up the lid of the coffin, the guy let loose the spirit he had come for. The first thing the spirit said was that Michael was his descendant. The lad said hello to William and smiled, for he was very glad to see him. William was surprised that the guy didn't react at all to his appearance, because he had tried his best to look mysterious, and now he was embarrassed that it hadn't worked. Michael reassured him and said that necromancers are not surprised at the sight of a skeleton. Also, Michael only got here after reading the diary about William and this place, so he's past that stage where you have to wonder. This book is called The Diary of the Spiritual Master William. Of course, Michael didn't read it in this life, but in a past one. It was the moment when Michael completely lost his values, after changing his class to mage. After reading it, the guy returned to the first floor, found the place and became a spirit master, but failed when he tried to make it one of his summoned warriors. In general, William really liked the way Michael was talking to him, and he was very glad to have such a well-read man come to him. At any rate, he was better than any of the unscrupulous bastards of 10 years ago. In fact, Mike was still wondering what he should do with this skeleton, put him to sleep or try to cooperate. For starters, he requested a change of class, right away. William said it couldn't be done until the guy got up to the 10th floor, and he explained the standard step-by-step instructions on how to change class. Michael interrupted him, showed him his stats, and told him that he was already a necromancer and was allowed to change classes. William was shocked by what he saw. No one had ever managed to change his class on his own without going up to the 10th floor. It was just unbelievable. Then Michael asked, "Will they change his class or not?" Without further ado, William began the procedure. The guy forested into a lotus pose, the skeleton flying in front of him. Even long before the tower was on the ground, William was a climber who ruled at the top. Despite the fact that he was already a powerful necromancer, he was always looking for ways to become even more powerful. Calling warriors from skin and bone was no longer enough, but is there anything stronger than that? He wanted to learn how to summon something completely different, like the souls of people who were no longer alive. After a long time, he finally succeeded and created a class called Spirit Master. But his old business had reached its limits, and the class he had created was on the verge of extinction. So he decided to put one last experiment on himself, which was to use necromancy on himself, and then hope that the descendant could find him. William's diary says that to find a descendant who would follow in his footsteps, he became someone who was half NPC. Now Michael became the 3rd Spirit Lord, the second was also him, only in a past life. In order to capture a soul, he simply had to use a skill called soul summoning, as well as a guy is now able to change his fate. Michael was extremely happy that he had succeeded. Now, with the ability to capture souls that the boy had been given, he wanted to make his first capture. It had to be William's soul. The last time the boy had failed, but now he was much better prepared. William congratulated the boy on his successful change of class, then asked him to go upstairs and spread his name. The boy smiled slyly and said that William should go and do it himself. This answer made the skeleton very angry, for the diary clearly stated the promise that anyone who changed class through William would make. Here was the answer. The guy said that shifting your responsibilities to other people was a bad habit, and that you should get rid of it. But it didn't matter anymore, because the guy would fix it now and do it even for free. Michael used his new skill and began to devour William's soul. The skeleton screamed that he wouldn't let himself be grabbed for nothing, but Michael had long since succeeded in doing what he had planned. The stones that fell on the floor created a magical prison for William. The space was quite small, so the conditions were not very good. The most interesting thing is that this spell was low level, but it was enough to calm William down and lock him in a cage. The skeleton shouted that after that Michael would never be safe again. A hunt would begin for him. He also said that this prison would not hold him here, and he could break him at any moment. But no one else said that would be the only obstacle for William. On his way out, the guy scattered many more of these stones, which will constantly create new prisons for the skeleton. He does not have enough power to destroy absolutely all of them. William could not understand what kind of man stood before him and how he knew so much, how being on the first floor he could have such skill. Michael said that he had failed in his past life, but that he had succeeded now. William only had more questions after this statement. In the end, the guy admitted that he was the second spirit lord after all. The skeleton recognized him immediately and shouted his name with great anger. Then the guy tried again to take his soul for himself, and he succeeded. The skeleton remained just a skeleton, without any magical power. Michael told him not to worry, now for sure all his wishes will be realized. When the guy went outside, there was a loyal army waiting for him and waiting for further instructions, as well as demons and gods were watching him. Michael said he would show his plans soon, even if they didn't stop bugging him. You just had to wait a little longer. After looking at his army, the guy realized that he didn't need any more skeleton soldiers and made a decision to destroy them. And then he created an army of souls that he had accumulated. They probably couldn't talk either. Then, among all the souls, someone called Michael a freak. It turned out to be William, who returned to this world in his usual human form. He was very unhappy with the boy's antics, yet William had never been a spiritual soldier. This was the first time Michael had seen William like this. He must have been very handsome when he was young, because even now he didn't look bad. In a past life it was the opposite. Michael had failed to capture him. William was not allowed to move much abruptly, because he lived only because of Michael's mana. If the guy stopped the flow, William would immediately disappear from the face of the earth. You could tell that William was like a dog now, but he wasn't ready to admit it. Michael reminded him of what he did to people who disobeyed him, so he did to William what he did to everyone. Also, we shouldn't have forgotten how I'm a guy's character trait. William was now fully aware that he was completely under Michael's control, for the guy had mad skills. If he didn't listen to him, he would swallow him whole and that would be the end of it. Eventually William was reconciled and wanted to know what Michael's plan of action was next. We had to destroy that bastard King Cobalt as soon as possible. The lad climbed the grounds and moved toward the castle. At the entrance he was met by the first guard of 2 kobolds, which he dealt with in a couple of seconds. Then he released his entire army of spirits, and went with them to the king. There on the way they encountered the first wave of kobolds, who tried to stop Michael. The kobold spirits no longer fit him, so they simply exterminated them along the way. When there were no more monsters in the street, the boy ordered that he be brought to the king at once. The king wanted to prepare some kind of proposal for the boy, but it is not certain that he would even be listened to. After all, Michael was already inside, and he was destroying the kobolds with instantaneous speed. They attacked from all sides, but Michael's army was not small either, and defended him in all blind spots. Then the boy drew his sword and, with it, destroyed 3 at once with a single blow. When there were no more kobolds left in the center of the house, Michael looked around and headed toward the king's room. The whole time the gods were watching him and cheering him on. That's cool, of course, but the guy didn't need the encouragement of an old man with hairy legs. In any case, the guy would get to do what he had planned. Meanwhile, the king was engaged in some kind of sacrifice to save himself, but he said it wasn't enough to satisfy the gods. So he tried every way to save himself. The other kobolds begged the king not to touch them. Then they managed to find some girl and dragged her to the king. This made him very happy, so he grabbed her and dragged her to the table. But it didn't get very far. Mike was already there and threw his sword right into the king's hand, and he dropped the girl. Michael realized the way the king was trying to save himself. It made him laugh a little. But as it was, all their plans were doomed to fail. When the king recognized Michael, he was not so bold. The angry look was gone, only the eyes that glowed remained. Michael said that the king looked exactly like a sick scumbag. This hurt him, and he shouted that he was a king and should be treated with respect. In his opinion, a human being is a much weaker creature than a kobold. The king was too arrogant, for a first-floor monster, taking on too much. The girl who was dragged here could not understand what was happening, but she was glad that the king was distracted by another person. It gave her hope that she could survive. Without long thinking, the girl gets up and starts to run away. The king begins a higher power at the watching demon, pulls out sharp claws and throws them directly at the girl. She is very lucky that she noticed them and was able to dodge them in time. She certainly wasn't ready to go out of her life today. At this point, Michael had already intervened in the fight and repelled another attack. King was very surprised to see that all of his attacks failed. Michael simply smashed the object, which flew with tremendous speed. The girl thanked the guy for saving her, and he in turn recommended that she run away from here as soon as possible. The girl had one urgent question, and she decided to ask it now. It seemed to her that the guy Dakibi is a powerful kind of person who is on a very high floor. The guy was very interested in the fact that the girl was not stupid and knew a lot of things. It was necessary to save her, so that later we could talk. Maybe she knows some interesting information. Anyway, for now, Michael told her to hide somewhere if she wanted to, and later he would be sure to find her. While this small talk was going on, the king continued to sacrifice his warriors. The guy didn't like it very much, so he finally decided to attack the king. At high speed, between explosions, the guy ran toward the king, and eventually hit him hard in the jaw with his fist. After which the king flew a few meters to the side. He couldn't understand how the guy from the first floor had such great strength. Michael didn't plan to stop there and wanted to strike again. But it turned out to be not quite as simple as one might think. The king shouted the demon's name and summoned it, and the demon swallowed Michael's hand as it struck. It's a monster called the Red Golem. How did this king even manage to summon such a high-level demon? He was actually very selenious, and would throw the guy to the ground right away. The king liked it all very much, but it was too early to rejoice. Michael was alive and full of strength. The fight was just beginning. When Michael recovered from such a hard blow, he decided to ask his spirits for advice on what to do. The spirits didn't respond, but began to act immediately, swarming inside the monster and tearing it apart from the inside. To say that the king was shocked is simply to say nothing. His facial expression Michael will remember for a very long time. The golem was destroyed in the blink of an eye. Since the king managed to summon the golem, it meant that he was far from a kobold. Because the king was curious about Michael's abilities as a spirit lord, he decided to tell him a little. But first he ordered his spirit to lift him into the air. Kobold asked to be put in his place because he thought he was Michael's king. He must have been out of his mind by now if he said such silly things. That was the end of this king's story. The king had only himself to blame for Michael's victory, so he had no right to be offended. And to top it all off, Michael made sure that the king paid for his attempt to confront him. The demons who watched the whole thing laughed heartily. With a snap of his fingers, the guy ended the king's life once and for all. As he fell down, the guy walked over to him and took his soul, then twisted the little ball. After that, he played with it for a while and slowly began to absorb it. Michael had another useful skill that allowed him to collect souls and create medicines that could be used later. When the guy had already eaten the soul, he got some reinforcement, but it seemed to him that it would be more significant. The power increased not much at all. When the guy finished his business, this nice girl he saved came up to him, thanked him for it, and said her name was Eva. In fact, it was pure chance that the guy saved her. He had come here for a completely different reason, to defeat the king. But in spite of that, the girl still wanted to thank the guy so she wouldn't owe him a debt of gratitude. The guy became very curious as to what the girl would do if Michael, on the contrary, wanted to destroy him and sell him. Such a scenario could well be, for this girl is worth a lot. Just as suddenly her eyes turned bright pink, and she replied that she would have handled him. Mike asked the girl why a person like her with such power would be on the first floor and not on the 100th floor. Eva replied that someone attacked the Dakibi village on the 100th floor. The inhabitants of this village are quite strong representatives in this tower. Even as a very strong representative of some other village, it is far from certain that anyone could overpower them. The boy asked a question in which he wanted to know if anyone who was a representative of one of the 4 great species lived there. This village can only be disturbed by ladies who are members of one of the 4 great species, or to a lesser extent, there must be support of ordinary warriors by someone of the 4 species. Maybe it was one of those who had something to do with the guild. The guy didn't hold back and called them bastards out loud. The girl wasn't much afraid, so she asked if everything was okay. The guy said it was okay and would be leaving now. He couldn't find any more here in this environment of puddles of cool stains. He had to go get some fresh air. Then the girl said she wanted to hike further with Michael. On the one hand, it is not a bad idea. She knows well where this village is and knows its inhabitants. But on the other hand, she is still too young to see this terrible way. In any case, the guy her psyche did not care much, so he was not against seeing her in his team. At first the guy warned that he would be very busy and he would not always be able to protect the girl effectively. Eva replied that she understood that and could take care of herself. The guy also reminded the girl that she had just almost lost her life in the Cobalt Castle. The girl replied that it was an accident and it would never happen again. After these words, Michael didn't hesitate to agree and took her on the team.